Hear that sound? That's not a storm.
It's the sound of 5,000 of the ancient world's most advanced war machines colliding. Forget the wars you think you know. Tonight, we travel 3,000 years into the past, to the day when two superpowers, Egypt and the Hittites, chose to settle their rivalry at a single point on the map called Kadesh. This is not just a story of battle. It is a saga of god-kings and their egos, of a balancing power collapsing, and of how the greatest bloodshed of its age gave birth to the world's first recorded peace. Set your blanket aside for now. Tonight's bedtime story is a little bloody. Welcome to HistoraBlend, where we blend the dust of the past into epic tales that breathe again.
Please, take a seat.
There is an old story we would like to whisper to you, a story of imperial ambition and how human blood was exchanged for peace.
So listen closely. Are you ready? Let us open the first page. Let us return to a time when the world was still held in balance by three great powers.
Before we speak of war, we must speak of balance. Forget the world map you know today. 3,000 years ago, the world was far simpler and far more deadly. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine dry, scorching air biting your skin, wind carrying the scent of desert dust and faint traces of burning incense. Welcome to the late Bronze Age. In this era, the fate of civilizations rested in the hands of three great families, three godfathers of the ancient world. To the south, Egypt, the dragon of the Nile, a land of gold, tradition, and gods who ruled upon the earth. To the north, Hatti, the Hittite Empire, the lion of Anatolia, masters of stone fortresses and the cold secrets of iron. And between them, Mitanni, a prosperous balancing kingdom, resting between two great rivers. For centuries, the world remained stable under a carefully maintained tension. This was the golden age of diplomacy. Kings exchanged clay letters, addressing one another with affectionate words, "My brother." They traded luxury gifts. They married off their daughters. Yet behind every diplomatic smile, a hand always hovered near the sword. They all desired the same thing, the Levantine corridor, a narrow trade route along the Syrian coast. Whoever controlled this corridor controlled the economic lifeline of the ancient world. And the lock upon that corridor was a fortified city called Kadesh. As long as Mitanni remained strong, Kadesh stood safely in neutral hands. But nothing lasts forever. Slowly, the great balancer fell ill, rotted from corruption within, and crushed by Hittite ambition from without, until at last, Mitanni collapsed. The pillar that held the world in balance vanished into history. And when the dust of Mitanni's fall settled, Egypt and Hatti realized something terrifying. The barrier was gone. Now, the dragon and the lion stared directly into one another's eyes, hungry. Kadesh stood ownerless, and the struggle for dominance of the ancient world had begun. A power vacuum is like an open wound. It attracts predators. And in 1279 BCE, two new predators stepped onto the stage of history. A tense world welcomed two new kings, their blood still boiling. In Egypt, the throne was taken by a young man in his early 20s. His name was Ramesses II. He was handsome, exceptionally confident, and perhaps a little narcissistic. Ramesses didn't just want to be king, he wanted to be a god walking on earth. He was obsessed with surpassing the glory of his father, the great Pharaoh Seti I. To him, the world was a blank canvas, meant to be filled with statues bearing his own face, and the fastest way to prove his greatness was to conquer the north. But in the north, on the cold lands of the Hittites, sat a very different king, Muwatalli II. If Ramesses was a blazing fire, Muwatalli was solid stone. He was experienced, cunning, a master of military strategy. He knew the young Egyptian pharaoh had his eyes on him, and Muwatalli had no intention of stepping back even an inch. Both kings wanted Kadesh. In the 5th year of his reign, Ramesses decided the time has come. He assembled the largest army Egypt had ever seen, 20,000 soldiers, divided into 4 great divisions, each named after their gods, the divisions of Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth. They marched across the desert, a massive serpent of men and chariots slithering toward Kadesh. Ramesses led from the front, feeling invincible. But he forgot one thing. War is not only about strength, it is also about deception. As the Egyptian army approached Kadesh, they captured 2 desert wanderers. Under interrogation, the men confessed in fear. They said, "Great Pharaoh, the cowardly Hittite king is far to the north, in the land of Aleppo. He is too afraid to face your arrival." Ramesses, his ego already scraping the sky, swallowed the information whole. He believed his enemy feared him. It was a fatal mistake. The 2 wanderers were double agents, bait carefully planted by Muwatalli. Feeling safe, Ramesses committed one of the greatest blunders in ancient military history. He ordered his forward unit, the division of Amun, to march ahead at full speed. He wanted to reach Kadesh first and claim victory. As a result, the Egyptian army became dangerously split. The distance between Ramesses at the front and his 3 supporting divisions behind grew wider and wider, miles apart. The young pharaoh arrived south of Kadesh, set up camp casually, confident that his enemy was still hundreds of kilometers away. He did not know that behind the hills of Kadesh, across the river, King Muwatalli was already waiting, silent, patient, with tens of thousands of soldiers and thousands of heavy war chariots ready to strike. Ramesses, the self-proclaimed young god, had just walked straight into the lion's den. The young pharaoh arrived south of Kadesh as the afternoon sun began to sink toward the west. The city's fortress stood before him, silent, still. Certain that the enemy was far away, Ramesses ordered the division of Amun to set up camp. Tents were raised, horses were unhitched from their chariots to rest, soldiers loosened their armor and caught their breath. They believed victory was already theirs, without having to fight for it. Ramesses himself withdrew into his golden tent. The atmosphere was calm, too calm. That silence shattered when Egyptian scouts dragged in 2 new prisoners, captured hiding near the camp. Their eyes were wild with fear. Nothing like the wanderers from before. Under harsh interrogation, a horrifying truth finally spilled from their mouths. They did not point north. They pointed across the river, toward the hills just behind the city of Kadesh. The realization struck Ramesses like a blade. King Muwatalli had not fled. He was there, hidden behind the hills with the full strength of his army, thousands of infantry and thousands of heavy war chariots waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The pharaoh's heart nearly stopped. The towering ego collapsed, replaced by pure, naked panic. He understood it all at once. He had been deceived. He had swallowed Muwatalli's bait. He had split his own army and marched willingly into a killing zone. Now he stood alone, separated by miles from his 3 supporting divisions. The camp filled with restrained chaos. The fastest messengers were ordered south, whips cracking, horses pushed to exhaustion, to summon reinforcements. But there was no time. As the couriers began their desperate ride, the ground around the camp started to tremble. Not an earthquake. From beyond the river, a low rumble rose, growing louder by the second. Ramesses turned. His eyes widened as his nightmare took form. From behind the hills, thousands of Hittite war chariots burst forth like a rolling dust storm. They thundered across the river at full speed, swinging wide, slamming into the unprotected flank of the Egyptian camp. The trap had closed, and the young god of Egypt was locked inside. Before the storm of iron truly struck, let us pause for just a moment at this critical second. Take a deep breath. If you have, then you're ready to continue into the most epic part of this story. Listen closely. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Thousands of Hittite war chariots, heavy killing machines pulled by 3 horses and manned by 3 warriors armed with spears, smashed into the Egyptian camp like a tsunami of iron. The unprepared Amun division collapsed within minutes. Total panic erupted. Tents were trampled under wheels. Egyptian horses, still unattached to their chariots, bolted in terror. The screams of shocked soldiers were swallowed by the thunder of Hittite chariot wheels, crushing everything in their path. Desert dust exploded into the air, forming a thick brown fog that blinded all vision. Within the chaos, the Hittite forces moved with ruthless efficiency, cutting off escape routes to the south and isolating the pharaoh from the rest of his army. Amid the storm of dust and blood, Ramesses II stood surrounded. His nightmare had come true. Most of his personal guard had fled or fallen. His proud army was in shambles. The arrogant young god was now nothing more than a mortal man staring death directly in the face. Yet at the lowest point of despair, the legend of Ramesses was born. Driven by reckless courage, or perhaps by terror at the thought of humiliation, Ramesses refused to surrender. He leapt onto his war chariot, tied the reins around his waist so his hands were free to fire his bow, and did the unthinkable. He did not flee. He charged, alone, straight into the mass of Hittite chariots encircling him. Arrow after arrow flew from his bow with astonishing speed. Like a cornered lion, his ferocity was so overwhelming that the front ranks of the Hittites hesitated and fell back, if only for a moment. Ramesses fought as if possessed, buying time second by second. But no single man can face thousands forever. The enemy ring tightened. His horses began to tire. Just as the Pharaoh stood on the brink of total destruction, a miracle occurred. Not from the south, where the 3 Egyptian divisions still lagged far behind, but from the west, from the direction of the sea. Unexpected reinforcements arrived. They were the Nearin, an elite Egyptian unit advancing along the coastal route, appearing at the most critical moment imaginable. They slammed into the exposed flank of the Hittite forces, who had been too focused on finishing Ramesses. The tide of battle shifted. The Hittites, once dominant, were now trapped, caught between Ramesses raging at the center and the Nearin striking from the side. Chaos raged until sunset. Thousands of war chariots collided, splintering into wreckage of wood and metal across the Syrian plain. When night finally fell, and darkness separated the exhausted armies, the battlefield of Kadesh fell silent. There were no victory cheers, only the moans of the wounded, and the sight of countless human and horse bodies lying across the ground. Ramesses survived the death trap, but failed to capture Kadesh. Muwatalli succeeded in ambushing his enemy, but failed to kill the Pharaoh. That day, beneath the dust of Kadesh, 2 giants clashed with all their might, and the result was a bloody stalemate. The morning after the battle, the sun rose over a horrifying sight. Thousands of the finest soldiers of Egypt and Hatti lay scattered around the fortress of Kadesh. Ramesses had survived, but his army was shattered. Muwatalli still controlled Kadesh, but he had failed to destroy Egypt's military strength. The 2 god kings fell silent. A bitter truth became impossible to ignore. They were evenly matched. If the war continued today, tomorrow, or years from now, the outcome would be the same. They would only bleed each other dry until both kingdoms collapsed. And beyond them, on the eastern horizon, a new power was beginning to rise, Assyria. Patient, ambitious, ready to devour any empire that weakened itself through endless war. At last, logic overcame ego. A quiet ceasefire followed. Ramesses withdrew his forces and returned to Egypt. Back home, Ramesses, the master of propaganda, ordered the construction of grand temples. Upon their stone walls, he carved a very different version of events, a tale of a single glorious victory at Kadesh, of how he alone defeated thousands of enemies. A beautiful lie crafted to conceal a catastrophic military miscalculation. But history's true turning point did not happen on the battlefield. It happened at the negotiating table. More than 10 years passed after that bloody day. Then, at last, peace took form. In 1259 BCE, an extraordinary document was created. Not written on papyrus, but engraved onto a silver tablet. It was the Treaty of Kadesh. This was no ordinary truce. It is the oldest fully recorded international peace treaty in human history. Within it, the Pharaoh of Egypt and the king of Hatti swore before 1,000 gods never to wage war against one another again.
Let there be peace.
More than that, they formed a defensive alliance. If Egypt were attacked, Hatti would send aid. If Hatti were threatened, Egypt would do the same. And so history delivered its greatest irony. A battle born from ambition and the desire for mutual destruction gave rise to the longest era of peace and stability of the late Bronze Age. 2 giants, once locked in mortal combat, finally understood something profound, that sometimes the pen, or a clay tablet, is sharper than the blade of a war chariot. Even today, Thousands of years later, a copy of the Treaty of Kadesh still stands proudly at the United Nations headquarters in New York. It remains there as a silent reminder to our modern world that sometimes the strongest peace is born from the bloodiest stalemate. That even the ego of god-kings, towering as the sky, must eventually bow to the reality that war is not always the answer. The saga of Kadesh teaches us one enduring truth. History is not only about who wielded the sword most fiercely, but about when humanity was wise enough to sheath it once more. Tonight's tale has come to an end. For now, we close these dust-covered pages of the Bronze Age. Thank you for sitting with us, listening to Whispers from the Past by the fireside of HistoraBlend. Keep the flame alive until we meet again in the next journey through time.